Launched toward the end of the 1950s, Leave It to Beaver felt like a cherished keepsake box tucked away in the collective soul of the entire country. In the gentle monochrome glow of early morning light, the Cleaver household stepped into view, representing everything Americans craved in the aftermath of wartime chaos: a serene household, a tender mother, a steady father, and kids mischievous just enough to spark warm grins. Each evening, countless households gathered around their bulky wooden television consoles, convinced they were witnessing their own lives, or at least the most idealized reflections of themselves, unfolding across every moment. Yet concealed beneath that flawless domestic exterior lay realities that American TV desperately tried to suppress. A woman compelled by the director to transform until she no longer recognized herself, a little girl prohibited from even maturing, a father who had to brush away genuine sorrow merely to maintain his poise before the lenses despite his world having just crumbled in actuality. And here are 10 instances when the performers of Leave It to Beaver pivoted away, not out of disdain for the production, but because they invested so deeply in crafting an impeccable universe. They themselves were denied the chance to inhabit Jerry, while a tear-soaked home run the young actress compelled to conceal puberty from a whole country, and they expected me to smack the ball and spin around. While I refused to spin since I feared everyone would notice my coat. Expat Jerry Vile once embodied the playful pulse of Leave It to Beaver's initial years. Little Judy Hensler, with her cutting grin, sly sideways glance, and impeccably timed barbs that rendered Beaver mute, emerged as the embodiment of a sharp, self-assured, delightfully impish girl. Yet off camera, nobody realized Jerry was enduring the most frightening trial any youngster could face, being made to mask her own developing form. When Jerry's physique started to alter, her chest forming her stance, adjusting all the utterly ordinary markers of adolescence, the crew did not regard it as typical. They saw it as an issue. The wardrobe staff instructed her to wrap her chest firmly to sustain the fantasy of a petite schoolgirl. Nobody inquired if it ached. Nobody asked if she felt humiliated. Jerry was merely 13, and each time the bindings were wound around her, she sensed imprisonment, breathlessness, and retribution simply for maturing. Like every other child, then arrived the sequence she would never erase from memory. The installment revolved around the classroom baseball match. Judy smashes an ideal home run, twirling victoriously while classmates applaud. The lens seized a second of untainted triumph. Yet in actuality, Jerry was navigating her initial menstrual day. Every rotation caused her stomach to plunge, petrified the pad might become visible, petrified the skirt would move, excessively petrified of the gazes upon her, petrified of ridicule, petrified of being labeled unprofessional. Nobody understood that with each whirl, a 13-year-old was battling a personal terror she was not permitted to express. When the director shouted cut, everyone lauded the take. Jerry dashed directly to the changing area and erupted in sobs. Nobody pursued, they merely shouted after her, excellent work, you're okay. That instant marked when Jerry comprehended her youth no longer belonged to her. She was not dismissed from Leave It to Beaver. She departed because, as she later revealed, if I had remained any longer, I believe I would have fractured. Jerry's existence afterward never sparkled with the glamour many young celebrities pursue. She returned to education, matured, and silently withdrew from Hollywood, although she featured in a handful of minor endeavors and even authored a recollection of her Beaver era. She candidly acknowledged that what she suffered on location left an unseen wound that trailed her far into maturity, and when she ultimately attended cast gatherings, observers beheld a composed, kindly lady, yet behind her gaze still hovered something of that 13-year-old who had once been compelled to diminish herself. And if you believe this tale is agonizing enough, our subsequent individual bore an even steeper toll to maintain the flawless persona America required at any expense. Barbara Billingsley, the nation's ideal mom, and the frightening cost of being obliged to exist like a sculpture. Oh, and the lads committed awful acts, but they were jests. They were, they. Barbara Billingsley was long regarded as the epitome of 1950s American broadcast. June Cleaver, the soft, refined mom who glided through each chapter in flowered gowns, spotless aprons, and a radiant strand of pearls. Yet years afterward, she confessed something that stunned the country. I fashioned an image so impeccable even I could not endure within it. And it all commenced with the director's unrelenting directives. Initially, the pearls were merely to conceal a slight dip in her throat. The elevated Shoes were solely to prevent her from appearing shorter than her swiftly lengthening on-screen boys. But the director converted these innocuous elements into unbreakable mandates. She must don the pearls, must wear the heels, must seem immaculate in every shot, every stride, every inhalation. No weariness, no unease, no alteration. Not even for an instant what had been adornments rapidly became restraints on a set scorching like an oven. Barbara remained upright for hours on razor-thin heels until her limbs quivered and her spine wailed. Some days she needed to prop against a wall, closing her eyes for brief moments merely to evade fainting, yet the second action sounded she re-entered the frame with a tranquil smile, flawless and collected, as if not one bead of perspiration traced her back. In a scarce discussion, she conceded there were days when it seemed like even the privilege to inhale did not belong to me, but the severest strike arrived when the program concluded. When Leave It to Beaver finished, Barbara emerged hoping to recover herself. Instead, Hollywood no longer perceived Barbara Billingsley whatsoever. They perceived solely June Cleaver, the unchanging emblem, forged from disciplined agony and mute. Offering any alternative part, any alternative facet of her was rejected. The gateways of her profession slammed closed, not due to absence of skill, but because she had grown too flawless to be permitted humanity. For over 2 decades, Barbara dwelt in the shade of the figure she had shaped until 1980, when an opportunity for freedom finally materialized, ironically via a part that was the total antithesis of all June Cleaver embodied. In Airplane, she materialized as a middle-aged traveler who abruptly conversed fluent jive like a veteran street dweller. Spectators howled with mirth at the ridiculousness. Yet for Barbara this was not comedy. It was the first occasion in years she could chuckle as herself for the first time. It was not the faultless June Cleaver in the Illumination, but Barbara, the authentic woman who had once been stifled by an unattainable standard. Recall how June Cleaver always appeared perfect in every sequence. Cling to that sensation, because next the focus shifts to a small boy, the country's adored emblem, who bore the utmost cost merely to sustain audience delight. Jerry Mather's Beaver. I wish I had experienced a more ordinary youth. It was something that placed me on the correct path as I matured, and it was immensely enjoyable to perform. To be frank with you, I probably would have done it without pay, just for the enjoyment. For 6 seasons, Leave It to Beaver was characterized by one countenance, Jerry Mathers. As Beaver Cleaver, he was not merely the central figure, he was the essence of the series. By age 8, Jerry had transformed into one of the most identifiable juvenile celebrities in America. He surfaced on broadcasts and publications and advertising drives and was acknowledged wherever he traveled. Yet when the glare persists too long, it begins to scorch. The program's shooting timetable devoured his existence. Every week, he learned with instructors on location, shot extended hours into the night, and passed weekends conducting media discussions and public events. There was no space for companions, for playground antics, or for being an actual youngster. He was no longer a child. He was a trademark, a charming Beaver everyone cherished except himself. Years afterward, Jerry pondered, I am thankful for the program, but I do wish I had possessed a normal childhood, one where I could tumble, get muddy, and not need to grin when the director called action. By 1963, as Leave It to Beaver entered its 6th season, Jerry had developed not only older but more astute. He understood he needed to recapture his life at the peak of the program's triumph. He rendered a startling choice to halt. He desired to attend school, to be a genuine pupil, not merely portray one on television. The creators knew the program could not persist without him, and thus Leave It to Beaver concluded, not because viewers ceased tuning in, but because the lad at its core wanted to finally mature. The program granted him renown, affection, and a niche in broadcast annals. Yet in subsequent discussions, Jerry frequently admitted, I adore that program, but I detested having to mature before I ever had the opportunity to be a child. And if Beaver had to exchange his youth for the lenses, his on-screen sibling was about to exchange something even greater, his Olympic aspiration, merely to continue grinning for the camera. Tony Dow, from the diving platform to the studio floor, a vision or a remorse person now that's in his 20s and accomplishes things but never acknowledged for anything I do. Before he transformed into the country's model elder brother, Tony Dow harbored a wholly distinct ambition to become an Olympic diver from age 5. The pool was his alternate residence. Every airborne twist and turn was acquired through hours of practice in freezing water and scores of painful belly smacks. By age 9, Tony was already a junior diving title holder in California, anticipated by many to reach the Olympics. Then one day, his mother, a stunt artist, brought him to an open audition. For Leave It to Beaver, Tony had not even intended to try out. He arrived in athletic shorts, hair still damp from the pool, yet when the director observed that luminous face, soft grin, and assured gait, they knew immediately this was Wally Cleaver. By the close of that afternoon, Tony's route toward the pool was finished, substituted by endless days under studio illuminations on screen. Wally was the ideal brother, kind, composed, and adult, the prototype every American household desired their sons to imitate. Tony enacted the part so persuasively that the nation believed he genuinely was that youth, yet off camera, he was still an adolescent attempting to discern his identity with all the awkwardness, bewilderment, and agitation that accompanied maturing. Every day, he had to retain the perfect grin, the serene posture, the stable voice, and when the lenses ceased turning, the strain did not. It pursued him home into his slumber, even into his visions. After Leave It to Beaver concluded, Tony conceded that he had misplaced part of himself inside the figure. Wally Cleaver became a barrier between who he was and who the world desired him to be. He attempted diversifying, directing, sculpting, even producing, but the shade of Wally persisted. People did not see Tony Dow, the creator. They saw Wally, the icon. Over the years, Tony battled depression. He once revealed, "I felt imprisoned between two realms. The individual I truly was, and the individual America wanted me to be." Still, Tony stayed appreciative. He knew that without Leave It to Beaver, the world might never have known his name. But if you were Tony Dow, which would you select, the pool or the glare? And if Tony Dow had to forfeit his vision, his on-screen father would soon confront a far more agonizing loss. His actual kin, Hugh Beaumont, Ward Cleaver, private sorrow behind the ideal grin. Well, why don't you get him on the horn and talk to him? The horn. When viewers envision Leave It to Beaver, they picture one gentleman, Ward Cleaver, calm, sage, the sort of dad who always knew the precise words to utter, yet behind that warm tone and soft grin, Hugh Beaumont, the man who portrayed him, was bearing a grief no chapter could ever conceal. In 1959, as the program entered its third season, Beaumont's career was at its zenith. He was hailed as the incarnation of the American patriarch, strong, ethical, reliable. Yet one fall afternoon, a lone telephone call altered everything. His mother-in-law and his wife's young son from a prior union were traveling to see him in Los Angeles when their vehicle collided. His mother-in-law perished immediately. The boy was gravely hurt. Hugh hurried to the medical center, but it was too late. When he rejoined the set weeks later, he donned the same kindly grin, delivered the same line, "Son, I'm proud of you," with the same gentle inflection. But inside, he was shattered. Team members later remembered how between shots, he would sit wordlessly for extended periods, gazing into the empty studio background. That calamity transformed him. Beaumont began to view everything anew. He lamented not being present for his kin when they required him most, and for the remainder of his days, whenever someone commended him for depicting the perfect father, he would merely grin and murmur softly, "I'm just performing what I wish I had done better in real life." In later years, Beaumont directed 23 installments of Leave It to Beaver, more than anyone else on the program. Yet each time he positioned himself behind the lens, the recollections resurfaced, the mirth of the juvenile performers, the picture of the joyful household on screen, and the vacant area left by the one he lost in actuality. And next arrives the man who made America chuckle, while his genuine life morphed into a subdued calamity. Ken Osmond, Eddie Haskell, the part that never concluded after cut. Personally, it was I was definitely typecast. You know something? Today, looking back, Eddie has been so good to me my entire life. In the realm of Leave It to Beaver, Eddie Haskell was that youngster, courteous and enchanting with grown-ups, sleek and mocking with peers, always discovering a method to grin his way out of difficulty. That duality rendered Eddie one of the most indelible figures in American broadcast and converted Ken Osmond, the performer behind him, into an immediate celebrity. Yet that achievement was a double-edged blade. Eddie Haskell was too authentic, too vivid, so much so that spectators could not distinguish the figure from the individual. In Hollywood's view, Ken Osmond was not an actor, he was Eddie eternally. When Leave It to Beaver finished, Osmond attempted to liberate himself from the part. He accepted other movie and TV roles, but no matter how strong his enactments were, people chuckled the instant he emerged. They assumed he was performing Eddie anew. His career stagnated, and by the late 1960s, Ken rendered a choice that astonished everyone. He departed Hollywood and enlisted in the Los Angeles Police Department. He became an actual officer, yet even in attire he could not evade Eddie's suspects he detained. Would just hey look it's Eddie Haskell. One publication even reported that he had been shot in the line of duty, and the public did not accept it. They thought it was a promotional ploy. When Ken was later questioned about it, he merely stated softly, "Sometimes people forget that I'm not Eddie." Years afterward, when he was invited to feature in Still the Beaver 1983, Osmond paused, but he ultimately consented this time. Eddie Haskell was no longer a playful adolescent, he was a middle-aged gentleman still. Sporting that crooked smirk, but wiser, wearier, more mortal. Ken explained, "I accepted the part again because I wanted to complete Eddie's tale. I wanted to pardon him and myself." The subsequent cast member, however, never received the opportunity to return. One day, the lad who had been Beaver's closest companion simply evaporated from the program. No farewell installment, no adieu sequence, nothing. Rusty Stevens, Larry Mondello. The youngster who vanished without a farewell. Mother's Day is soon, and we could write about our mothers, how we love them and pray for them, and Leave It to Beaver. If Beaver was the core of the program, Larry Mondello was its ideal accomplice in mischief. With his plump countenance, tousled hair, and perpetual expression of blameless difficulty, Larry was the companion. Everyone identified, the kid who always drew you into trouble, but was too charming to remain angry at. And then one day, he was absent. No clarification, no send-off, just absent for years. Admirers pondered what befell Rusty Stevens, the boy who made America chuckle. Rumors circulated that he had been dismissed, that the director disliked him, that he had resigned. The reality was far more intricate, according to individuals on the set. Rusty's mother frequently grumbled about the program's timetable, the writings, and the compensation. She desired her son treated as a luminary, not merely Beaver's underling. The strain grew intolerable until the creators rendered a distressing decision. They released Rusty. No outrage, no public declaration, just a silent revision of the script. And when the following season commenced, Larry Mondello simply no longer existed. Not long after, Rusty's kin relocated to Philadelphia, more than 2,580 miles from Hollywood, rendering any comeback impossible. His performing career terminated there in quiet. Rusty matured, labored in building, and remained distant from the limelight. Decades afterward, when Still the Beaver debuted in 1983, he made a short reappearance, not for celebrity, but to offer longtime admirers a moment of resolution and to softly seal the chapter on a youth that concluded too early. Do you recall that chubby-cheeked kid who could make everyone chuckle, then evaporated without a trace? The next one did not vanish. He departed from fame, deliberately resolved to discover truth instead of acclaim, and never glanced back. Stephen Talbot. Gilbert Bates, when performing, ceased being a vision. In the later seasons of Leave It to Beaver, a fresh countenance emerged beside Beaver. Gilbert Bates, the astute, rapid-thinking companion who often provoked even more difficulty than Larry Mondello, the juvenile performer who enacted him. Stephen Talbot was lauded for his innate allure and intellect. He was not the type of youngster who merely committed lines to memory. He comprehended his figure, and that rendered Gilbert one of the most unforgettable additions to the series. Yet off-camera, Stephen was quite distinct. The mirth, the youth troubles scripted into the writings, they no longer felt authentic to him. He was appreciative for the chance, but he soon understood he did not wish to devote his life pretending. In a later discussion, he stated, "I adored the people on that set, but I did not adore acting. I wanted to narrate real tales, not perform in someone else's rendition of them." As he aged, Stephen abandoned Hollywood and registered at UC Berkeley. Right amid the anti-war crusade, the boy who once starred in a wholesome family comedy became a student profoundly engaged in justice reporting and veracity. He later constructed a notable career as a reporter and documentary creator, producing hundreds of probing programs for PBS, revealing the very societal truths that Leave It to Beaver had once overlooked. When queried if he ever views the program now, Stephen grinned, "I see a kid striving to make people chuckle, and I'll always be proud of that." But the greatest lament of Leave It to Beaver was not about a cast member whatsoever. It was about a solitary sequence, one so straightforward that it nearly cost the studio $50,000 and almost terminated the series permanently. In the soup, the $50,000 sequence that nearly ruined the program. On May 6, 1961, American spectators tuned in eagerly for one of the most vigorously advertised Leave It to Beaver installments ever. In the soup, the narrative appeared simple enough. Beaver and his pal Whitey notice a gigantic sign displaying a steaming dish of soup. Whitey challenges Beaver to ascend, and check if the soup is genuine. And naturally, Beaver, never one to retreat from a foolish dare, climbs up and becomes trapped inside. It sounded amusing on paper, but realizing that instant would strain the program's finances and its team to the limit to render the deception persuasive. The production crew accomplished something no comedy had ever attempted before. They constructed two full-scale signs, one outdoors and one inside the studio. The exterior version towered along a Los Angeles roadway for broad views of Beaver ascending. The studio version was an enormous duplicate of the soup dish built for close-ups of Jerry Mathers flailing inside the soup. The team installed custom vapor containers, safety straps, and framework, all from nothing. The total expense, nearly $50,000, 1.5 times the typical Leave It to Beaver installment budget of $30,000. Director Norman Tokar later recollected that the team scarcely rested during shooting, terrified that one erroneous step could harm young Jerry Mathers. Yet paradoxically, the peril made the sequence feel authentic and indelible. When the installment broadcast, millions of watchers held their breath as Beaver dangled helplessly, vapor swirling around him while rescuers hurried below. It became one of the most emblematic moments in black and white broadcast history. Yet when the ovation subsided, the team realized what it had demanded. They had exhausted nearly the entire season's finances. The subsequent installment had to be shot on a reduced set with fewer performers and recycled items merely to recuperate monetarily. One scribe later quipped, "We called it in the soup, but to us it was the costly soup." That installment became mythical, yet for those behind the scenes, every review accompanied a exhale, beautiful sequence. We just wish it had not cost so much. And if in the soup made them pay in currency, their ultimate gathering decades later would make them pay in sorrow. The 1983 reunion, still the Beaver, the father, who could not return in 1983, 20 years after Leave It to Beaver concluded, America beheld something deemed impossible. The Cleaver kin reunited. The made-for-TV film Still the Beaver was advertised as a cozy gathering of former companions, former recollections, and former principals for millions who had matured with Beaver. Wally and June, it was a sentimental present on screen. Beaver was now a parent himself, laboring to rear two sons. Wally had become a stable adult, still the tranquil, protective sibling he had always been. June Cleaver, enacted by Barbara Billingsley, emerged with silver locks and that identical soft grin, as if time had never elapsed. Even Eddie Haskell Ken Osmond reappeared with his signature half-smirk, now mellowed by middle age and remorse. Everyone was present, almost because one gentleman could never return. Hugh Beaumont, the beloved Ward Cleaver, America's archetypal father figure. He had died just a year before the reunion commenced, when director Norman Tokar declared that the opening installment would be devoted to his remembrance. The whole cast dissolved in tears. Nobody could forget that gentle man in the armchair, imparting lessons with warmth and endurance. Now only his image positioned on a table symbolized the presence they all still sensed in every frame. Jerry Mathers later remembered, "We had discussed for years about doing a reunion, but kept delaying it. By the time we finally did, he was gone. We all just wished we had begun it sooner." Tony Dow echoed the feeling. Hugh was not just a co-star, he was our real father off-screen too. When Still the Beaver broadcast, spectators chuckled through tears. They beheld the Cleavers matured, yet could sense the void where the father once resided. For Jerry Mathers, that project was more than nostalgia, it was resolution. "We did not create that film to be famous again," he said. "We created it to inform Hugh that we still remember and that we are still living by what he taught us." It was the unofficial conclusion of Leave It to Beaver, a voyage that commenced with mirth, concluded with appreciation, and persisted in quiet. Even today, as vintage installments replay on broadcasts, viewers still grin at Beaver's blameless antics or June Cleaver's tender poise. Yet for those who once positioned themselves behind the lenses, every chuckle bears a hint of sweetness. An ache. Leave It to Beaver bestowed them renown, but also seized something invaluable, fragments of youth, liberty, and serenity that could never be recovered. Their laments were not about participating in the program, but about how tangible it all became. Nobody ever instructed them how to revert to themselves once the lenses halted, and perhaps that is why Leave It to Beaver persists, because the individuals who crafted it offered us more than mirth. They offered us their wounds, the kind that renders both youth and existence itself feel poignantly, beautifully authentic. Which instant do you recall most from Leave It to Beaver? The blameless mirth or the subdued moments that made you realize you had matured if you wish to continue delving into the unrevealed tales behind broadcast's greatest icons, the mysteries, regrets, and sorrows Hollywood attempted to conceal. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and activate the bell so you do not miss the next installment.